welcome to everybody, particularly welcome to some people who haven't been here before. There's information about us on your seats. If you've got any questions about us, just ask. We do lots of things here. We talk about our work as a centre for live art. And one of the things we do is run this study room resource that you're sitting in, and also do lots of events, and we also do publications. And we're absolutely thrilled and delighted to be the publisher of this beautiful book, To You, Love Letters to a Post-Europe, which has been edited by Lisa Alexander. And Lisa approached us a couple of years ago about the project and that publication. And we were really delighted to be able to come on board as a partner on that. So tonight is the launch of this beautiful book designed by David Keynes. So I'll hand over to Lisa in a minute. So just to say this evening we've got a whole bunch of different sort of presentations, conversations, and then there's going to be plenty of time for discussion at the end. So I just want to thank you all again for coming, and huge thanks to Lisa for inviting us to be part of it, and congratulations on the project, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Lois. Yeah, this has been a long time coming. So, I just want to say a few words on how this came about before sharing some short messages, responses from artists and others unable to be with us in the flesh today. The book includes the voices of at least 26 artists and writers, probably more like 30 if I was to count. This book took more than 3 years to travel from provocation to performance to page. In the midst of, to use Nikki Tomlinson's words, she was going to be here tonight, but she's not able to come. The fragmenting folly of a no-deal Brexit. This is all about connection, though, not only of governments, countries and open borders, but of the local and the personal that inform all this, that create our social space, that allow teenagers to dream, that dismantle the language of financialisation and of hostile environments, that welcome strangers, that step out of borders so we know our neighbours, so we exchange news or share a meal. This book is about gathering and about the alchemy of the singular and multiple. This book began at a particular moment. It is public and it is private, the summer of 2015. The letters assembled here were created for Love Letters to a Post-Europe at Bias, Athens, in October 2015. And here are some images from that event. The premise of which was to curate a process of coming together and collective witness following the referendum on financial bailout measures to Greece that summer, and amidst economic and social precarity across Europe as a whole. In spite of the capital controls and media scaremongering, Greece voted an overwhelming no to the measures, but no clear outcome followed. I had just reluctantly returned from living in Athens, a place where I have some very close friends. In this context, I sent out a provocation to the artists collected in these pages to respond with the action, ideal, or form of a love letter to Europe, a form that explores our connections and exceeds boundaries, and through its expressive frame of witness. This was to be presented live, a personal address whose reception will be shared. The book, then, is founded on the generosity of all involved. From the artists who gifted their work in 2015, and many others who hosted visitors in Athens, and the list is too long to read out here. I wonder if such a thing is possible now, or has disappeared from the psyche of those of us who live in this expensive and often harsh city of London. But we're here now, and this is happening. This book is also a series of messages that travel with us from summer 2015 to now. The messages also travel further in time and place than that, and they do something else too. They are questions, they are invitations, they create space. to borrow Mary Paterson's words, and she's with us here tonight. But how do we correspond if we are not already separated? It is not about physical space. There are other ways to diminish the space between us. In the summer of 2018, we came to encounter the letters remotely together, Mary Paterson and I, on the page. Mary for the first time as an archive of materials, while I reread letters I had also witnessed live. At the beginning of 2018, I lost a dear friend, and she is with us in these pages, Vasiliki Keidan. She performed Kira O'Reilly's work, which was entitled I Came to the Sea, and I Am Scared My Heart Is Broken. These words were reported to have been spoken by a fisherman on finding the bodies of the small child, Aylin Keidan, who drowned along with his 5-year-old brother, Galip, and their mother, Rianne, when they attempted to make the crossing from Turkey to Greece in the hope of refuge in Europe. That was her last performance. I am terrified to speak in public, but I will not apologise, Vasiliki, I promise. Before I read a few messages, and show you a few messages, I should say, that arrived this week from artists who were not able to make it, as they are a long physical distance away, let me please welcome Demosthenes Agrafiotis, one of the artists who performed his letter, An Action Contemplating Crisis, Bias, in 2015, and who also generously hosted Robin Deacon, who will be performing, he's presenting a film on Saturday at an event that carries this process on. And Maria Sideri, who's over there as well. Her letter was a song composed and recorded for Love Letters in 2015 that we played in her absence. She will be performing this for the first time tomorrow. Both have travelled to be with us from Athens tonight. Claire MacDonald, whose beautiful text was read by Evangeli Philly, and that she will be performing tomorrow also for the first time. And Claire also wrote the essay, Bosque, which we will be witnessing in a moment for the book, and whose support from the outset has made this possible, along with Lois, Keidan, and LADA. And there are many people involved, and I just want to say thank you to all those that have had input in this whole programme and project, and there's just too many, but they are listed in the book at the back. And to Mary Paterson. So please also welcome to Susan Butler. She's over there. And she will respond to a new provocation for the performances taking place at Arts Admin, Toynbee Studios tomorrow and Saturday, with a different lineup each night. We were also going to welcome here tonight Ivana Müller, whose short film had contemplated her journey across Europe in the week preceding the event at Bias in 2015, and also a little while before that, at the time when Hungary closed its borders. She cannot be here tonight due to illness, but she will be travelling from Paris tomorrow morning to perform a new live work that builds on her first filmed letter. And to David Keynes, who's here, who went above and beyond with his design work and patient insight and made this beautiful book into reality. Thank you. So please, if you want to find out more about the whole programme, there's a to you times 3, in other words, .com website as well, for details of all events taking place across the UK. So I'm just going to play, or rather, Joseph is going to play some messages. The first one is actually from a young friend of mine, Jana, and she lives in a small town in Bochum, in Germany, not far from Wuppertal, for those of you who know Pina Bausch and her Tanztheater Wuppertal. She wasn't at the event, but I did meet her in Athens a few years before the event, and I introduced her to my friend who performed Kira O'Reilly's piece to her group, her theatre group that used to rehearse all the time in Bias, whose pictures you're seeing. She edited together the footage that we got from various last-minute voluntary cameras of the whole event. So, and much of which wasn't necessarily usable, I might add. And this is her response, based on what she saw and what she could use. So this is the first message.
Αγαπημένη μου Ευρώπη,
actions which seek some kind of justice.
Crisis, 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 crisis.
The Eurasian continent is a continent, but Europe always wants to know precisely where Europe ends.
The next message, this is from Yoko Tawada. He's a novelist. She lives in Berlin, and she was the lady who poured the wine just then.
I was very angry at the British people who agreed to Brexit. And I was so happy when Marine Le Pen lost the presidential election. But if Brussels does not improve, other countries may also leave the EU. The EU, as an administrative machine, does not prevent its members from developing against European values. The more one stabilizes Europe as a whole, the more fragile it becomes. The idea of democracy, press freedom, equal rights, and human rights must become so independent that they no longer need Europe.
And the next message is the postscript read by one of the artists, Keidan, recorded, I think, yesterday.
Dear Europe, imagine every crossing made on every sea. Imagine our shadows as we pass over the seabed. A shiver across a salt-wet forest. We are unknown creatures with unknown desires. Unfish, humans, the eaters. Dear Europe, ίσως σε αυτή τη στιγμή πρέπει να επικοινωνήσουμε καλύτερα, αν και φοβόμαστε πολύ.
Okay, I have a translation, I realise. The last phrase, for those of us who don't speak Greek, maybe now in this moment we need to communicate better, even if we are very scared. There's one more message to play, and then I have a couple of messages, one from Brian LaBelle and one from Stephen C. Harvey to read out. This is Evdokia Delibetru.
Some years later, we have paid our debt in heliotropes and in life. Life that has run out, life flowing like water, water we drink, water we swimming to seek cure for wretched bodies, water we drowning while seeking salvation. We are still writing love letters, some of them formal to people we are not acquainted with. Dear to whom it may concern, I would like to express my deepest and warmest feelings of love, because that is all I'm left with.
Evdokia Delibetru, she read out Matthew Gulish's work, which in fact Matthew Gulish and his partner Lynn Hickson will be performing in person on Saturday. Okay, I just have a couple more messages. This one's from Brian LaBelle. It's hard to stay angry at the people who caused the financial collapse when Brett Kavanaugh is such a fucking asshole. But Brian believes he can stay angry at multiple people at once, but he would never be angry at the people here who are lovely and wonderful. The final message is from Stephen C. Harvey, who performed in the event in Athens, and he's also the partner of Vasiliki Dimou. They're both close friends of mine. Hello all. I'm sorry I can't be with you this evening, but I send my best wishes, and love for the launch of the To You book, brought so industrially to fruition by Lisa. This is true. Aside from being a treasury of works by the wonderful artist plus myself, his words, brought together by Lisa for the Love Letters to a Post-Europe event at Bias in 2015, it also forms a sacred candle for the memory of the last performance of my darling Vasiliki. That performance I cannot now help seeing as an accidental prefiguring of her own coming suffering, which she bore with the same indomitable force of will that she demonstrated under the grueling demands of Kira's piece. That she was brought down just as she was contemplating a fresh horizon in her performance activity with potential future collaboration with Kira in the offing is just one of the myriad facets of the unbearable tragedy that overwhelmed her. Vasiliki gave me the best decade of my life, yet she was only able to do so because we were both living under the auspices of a European brotherhood that my country, the United Kingdom, has now chosen to abandon in its current mad excess of xenophobic infantilism. Presumably, the likes of Rees-Mogg and Theresa May would spit on the idea of the monolithic entity that was Steve and Vasiliki, and their ilk will ultimately find themselves overturned by the force that brought Steve and Vasiliki together, because just as the memory of that which was she and I will endure, so new, such boundary-crossing monoliths of love will come into being. Kiss, 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 kiss. Thank you. And now I'm passing over to... Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm inviting Mary Paterson up to the stage.
I thought that we should toast Lisa, and the words I'm going to say are the same exactly in Greek and English. So γεια σας, καλώς ήρθατε. Είμαι η Clary MacDonald, είμαι ευχαριστημένη και είμαι ευτυχή που έχω μια καλή γυναίκα εδώ μαζί μας, Lisa Alexander. Lisa, ευχαριστημένη από όλη την παρέα εδώ, από Ελλάδα, από Αγγλία και παντού. Το βιβλίο, το To You, είναι όμορφο, το καλύτερο. Και πιστεύω ότι τα παράστασεις αύριο και μεθαύριο θα είναι θαύμα. Bravo, Lisa. Hello and welcome. I'm Claire MacDonald, and I'm pleased and happy to have a remarkable woman here among us, Lisa Alexander. So Lisa, thank you from all of us here, from Greece, from England, from everywhere. The book is beautiful, the best, and I'm sure that the performances tomorrow and the day after will be wonderful. Bravo. So please join me and raise your glasses to you, to you, to you, Lisa.
Δεν ξέρω τι να κάνω τώρα. Ευχαριστώ.
So I'm Mary, and I wasn't involved in the original project in 2015, but earlier this year Lisa invited me to enter into a correspondence about the work, and as she said, I kind of came to everything through this quite messy archive of things that had happened 3 years ago from the perspective of this time. And our correspondence is included towards the end of the book, after the documents of the performances. And we're going to read an edited extract of that now. Dear Lisa, something has happened to time recently. Historical time, political time, real time. I used to feel them running on separate tracks along the clean walls of my life, each ticking along to its own rhythm. I could follow them with my eyes or trace them with my heartbeat. If you keep going back for the furthest you can go, you get to Greece, cradle of civilization, birth of democracy, mother of the most learned words in our tongue, philosophy, academy, amygdala. We cite its culture as the authority on our own. We are the ancient Greeks, and they are the best of us. But time has trapped Greece in the European imaginary. With love, Mary.
Dear Mary, come closer. I'm trying to create a world frame, even if it exposes us to the sharpness of those tenderer breaks. The marks can be erased, but remain elsewhere. We used to be joined by the unfathomable timescale of rock and mountain as a small part of something larger that now lies beneath the sea. I'm on a plane to Athens. It's late February this year. I'm trying to find a system for navigating murky, muddy thought patterns. One voice is gone.
Whose voice?
Her voice.
And
yet still with us here, and inside me, others too. I do not know where this letter begins or ends. It resembles our country's relationship with Europe.
Does it make sense?
Except for the borders inside and outside growing backwards in time.
To call it ours anymore.
New languages have been created for those borders based on malappropriating old words.
How do we know?
Our enemies are once the strangers we gave shelter to after a long journey.
Who we are anymore.
Walls are being built again. Sing across them, love through them. And if you cannot be here in person, speak through me. I'll be your stand-in. How do I invite you, welcome you, us here? How can we invite and welcome you here? I'm writing as an approach to you, singular and to each one of you. Always approaching another as a conduit, as a series of transmissions, tender thoughts in the plural. Lisa.
Dear Lisa, let's imagine that each sentence is a rock surrounded by waves, and let's pretend the waves are a machine for the movement of ourselves on the crest of past and future. Part memory, part hope, part loss, part gain, part meeting, part parting. Together, away, together, away, together, away, together, away. It sounds like a lullaby or a war cry, depending on which side of the sea you start from. The question is, how elastic are your lines?
Dear Mary.
Or in other words, how open are your borders?
Time has elapsed. Is it enough? Is it too little? Look out for me at the water's edge. I am waving you into the shore. We cannot count our inhale, exhale. We cannot count the waves, but we can feel the smoothness of the pebbles as the water laps over them.
Let's imagine that this is somewhere. Let's imagine that our maps lie in time, not in place. Let's imagine that when you write of the past, you're also washing it, like the tides, into an unknown future. Sometimes the water is crystal clear. When you look down, you can see your feet and the centuries of ground-up time they're standing on. Sometimes the water is thick with debris and you see nothing at all. What I'm trying to say is,
I've been thinking about handwriting and how it connects the body to the word on page in a direct choreography, with moments in person, in place. Can I sit beside you on page? Can we merge? We are unknown to each other, but I'm swimming with you and the seabed moves beneath us.
the past is a different seascape and it doesn't stay still. A memory is a form of movement. To remember someone is to swim with them in a new tide of time. and memory is a type of correspondence.
Sometimes writing feels like addressing the soul and the soul of the world, a long, long journey home, an unknown home, always coming into being at the edges of perception, before which all skin was stripped to the bone, saying all.
Each new letter changes the resonance of the last. To remember something is to make it happen again.
Each reading releases another message.
This is what I think people mean when they say that love never dies.
To you, dear friend, to our friends, families, ancestors, future ancestors, to the winds and to the tides, can we include a consonant in these? Thanks. Thank you. I just want to welcome Claire MacDonald to. She's going to read Bosque.
Lisa asked me if I would read the essay that I wrote, a 3-page essay that I've written for the book. It's called Bosque, and you'll see why. If we reap what we sow, where do we get the seeds? A bosque is a small wooded place, and in the Tempest series comes on at one point and says, "My bosky acres and my unshrubbed down, rich scarf to my proud earth." I learned a new word this late July, theros, the ancient Greek word for summer, with a folk echo of eros, its common root with thermi, heat, and its origins in Homeric poetry. I learned this new to me word from a young Greek playwright, Markella Siri, who sent me her play, Theros, 3 or 4 days after the fires in Attica. When she sent me the play, which is not nostalgic or ancient at all, but a play about the claustrophobic inertia of modern-day Greece, I was looking at websites about the destruction by fire of the tiny beach town of Mati, perched on the shore next to the little port of Rafina, where for the past 20 years I've taken the boat to Andros, the first stop in the Cycladic Islands. Mati was almost swept away this summer in an unimaginably frightening and destructive forest fire that jumped a major highway and exit route, the road to Marathon, licking its way through a vernacular settlement of dwellings old and new, as it consumed animals and people and their homes and possessions and trees. Homer speaks of forest fires on 4 occasions in the Iliad, fires so violent they burned for a whole year, rekindled by wind. Mati is on the sea edge of Attica, the breadbasket of central Greece, producer of wine and oil, honey, wheat, fruits and vegetables, including herbs found nowhere else, according to botanists. In the tiny archaeological gallery on the first floor of the Venizelos airport is a model of the remains of an ancient farm found beneath the excavations as they raised the site to build the runway. This is now an urban rural area, 45 minutes from Athens on the metro, with vineyards bordering IKEA and local beach communities, the motorway to Marathon. As the boat to Andros drew away from Rafina just days ago, I could see thousands of stark burned cypresses, this was written in the summer, like tiny charcoal pencils among the skeleton buildings of Mati. Sacred to Hades, the cypress, and to Artemis and Aphrodite, poignant tree, protected, associated from ancient times with mourning. Mati was the first summer place that I ever went in Attica, in the early 1980s, taken there to family meals at the home of my then husband's cousin's grandparents. It was a low, old-fashioned, unremarkable house with a courtyard full of plastic chairs and tables under a deep, dark, spreading cypress. In my body memory, all thoughts of Greece contain the nostalgic scent of pine resin, the sound of cicadas, and the deep inertia of waiting, hands folded, sitting still, and almost silent under the tree. Attica. In the mid-1960s, when she was planning to retire, the British urban planner Jacqueline Tyrwhitt spent a night alone on the Attica plain. She pitched a tent under that enormous star-filled sky, south of Matti and the port of Rufina, between what's now the airport and the city of Athens. She decided to build there. She had, she thought, 20 years before the urban encroached on the rural. At Sperosa, she built a garden. Tyrwhitt was a botanist before she became a planner. Born in 1908, she trained at the Royal Horticultural Society in the 20s and then at the Architectural Association. It was in 1936, while at Dartington, the experimental arts and agriculture community in Devon, that she came across the work of the visionary urban planner Patrick Geddes and began to steer her course towards the practice and theory of human habitation. It's the sound of fire that is so terrifying, that perhaps must block all logical thought. On TV, we watch its manic pace and its licking gesture, moving as if animate. Close up, the sound is a deafening roar beyond imagining. In Australia, in December 2006, swimming in the sea at St Kilda, the playwright Jenny Kemp and I smelt burning eucalyptus, resinous and bitter, and saw in the distance the brown haze of bushfire. On ABC radio, I heard recordings of the roar, the telltale mark of its all-consuming power. Looking at images of the Matti fires on a Greek website, the English word used for the regularly spaced sites where the forest fire started, possibly set by arsonists, was fireplaces, a word redolent of hearth and home, domestic dwelling, settledness, chimneys, containment. No more homes now, mere ashy grates, crumbling, blackened. A friend told me just a few days ago that she'd held a bowl rescued from the devastation of Hiroshima. What was it like? I asked. Ashy, she said, stuck with ash that no wind could remove, no cleaning could erase. The old house in Matti burned. The heat of Marcella's Ceres Theros is not the heat of fire, it's the heat of inertia, the virtually solid heat of Athens in summer, heavy with the impossibility of moving, of taking in breath, but it contains the trace of eros, the quickening possibilities of love in times of inertia. A friend standing in my island garden this summer tells me that we've lost our memory of fire. We used to know, she said, or perhaps we simply lost our memory of what to do in its inevitable path. The speed of fire fanned by summer winds is beyond words. It cocoons no eros, contains nothing but consumes everything, takes the breath away. It's a wonder and a horror. In the past several years, Greece has kicked its heels in a dry desert of an economy. Yet there's been no intimation of systematic violence, and God knows there has been within the past of living memory. But we're moving so much faster now, speeding inevitably beyond the body memory of war, beyond perhaps its cautionary voice. Is it that we've lost our memories, or that we don't understand what we're reaping? My ex-mother-in-law, Aphrodite, still remembers the hunger of Athens in World War II, still remembers the after years. She's 87. True, after 2009, say, there were riots and anger and eruptions of random individualized acts of wrongful violence, but not systematic torture or organized gang executions or the rounding up and killing of groups of people, adults and children, huddling together. There is nothing more terrible than burning. No wonder that our image of hell is perpetual fire. In the 1960s, when she camped on the Attica plain and decided to build a garden, Tyrwhitt had a long association with Greece. She was part of an international network of thinkers, planners and engineers addressing the theory of human settlement. She worked with Patrick Geddes in India and with Marshall McLuhan and Buckminster Fuller in North America, but it is for her association with the visionary architect Konstantinos Doxiadis that she's best remembered, if she's remembered at all, in Greece. Konstantinos Doxiadis, urban planner, pre-war architect of the Attican regional plan, was a conceptual thinker whose urban vision was to balance transportation and zoning and communications in cities. The real dimension of a city is not space but time, he said. How a city develops and moves is more relevant than its shape of origin. He called this theory echeistics, with its root in the ancient Greek word for dwelling, eikos. It's a term analogous to economics or ecology. Echeistics aimed to set architecture and planning in a networked relationship to social thinking and culture, to see built forms as analogous to mineral forms, to the structure of chemical elements, to nature. By the time Tyrwhitt camped on the Attica plain and decided to found a garden there, she'd been a key figure in urban planning across the world. She'd worked with Oxialis on the Delos seminars, bringing thinkers and planners together to consider the idea of human settlement as networked, connected, interleaved. She edited the journal Echeistics from 1969 until she died in 1983. At Attica, at Sparosa, she founded a garden and a house to live in, and a seed exchange. The seeds in this list are exchanged between garden lovers, entirely on their own responsibility. In particular, the Mediterranean Garden Society bears no responsibility for accuracy of naming or for germination. This seed exchange is in no way a commercial transaction to which any specific regulations apply. Seed from hybrid plants, cultivars, may produce plants which do not have all the characteristics of the parent plant. And that's from the website of the Mediterranean Garden Society, which she founded. Can a seed be a letter? Can we seed what we hope to reap? Must we reap fire? The Sparosa Garden is now the home of the Mediterranean Garden Society. It once had a geodesic dome in honour of Buckminster Fuller, and it still has a range of native plants that even in the 1960s, when Tyrwhitt landed at Sparosa, were out of use and out of fashion in Greek domestic gardens. It's to her writings that I owe the knowledge of the herbs of Attica. Her writings on plants and planting inspire me to think about making my own water-wise garden in Greece this waterless summer. The Greek word botane, from boski, feed, tend, nourish, meant pasturage for cattle in Homer. And the early Greeks, says Helmut Baumann, in the Greek plant world in myth, art and literature. In The Tempest, Prospero calls his hedge-rowed fields my bosky acres, boundaried, connected pastures. The ancient word for sustenance travels through the mouth, becomes pasture. Tending and nourishing become the place that tends and nourishes, the not quite wild, the small wood, the grove, the green thicket, my bosky acres. Post-Matty, the image printed on my imagination is the group of 26 adults and children who died together on a cliff top above the Aegean in Matty, gathered, huddled, touching. Touch is the final human kindness, the final experience of what it means to be. The loss of the forest in the pre-ancient world was lamented in classical times. Baumann recalls Pliny's description of the forests as the most important of nature's gifts to humanity. From them comes the oil that refreshes the body, the invigorating wine, and all the different fruits. With wood we cross the seas, with trees we build our houses. Others have been here before us, in their own times of change. They leave behind not simply monuments, but the traces of crossing and dwelling. A time of despair is a time of hope, never snuffed, last out of the box, present in an ashy bowl from Hiroshima, in the graphic outlines of charcoal trees seen from the boat as I cross the Aegean, in the seeds exchanged between plant lovers, in the letter to the future that lies inside those seeds. Hope says that there is so much more ahead than anything that can be destroyed. It is in our hands. Thank you.
We're just going to have a welcome Susan up to talk, to ask some questions of the artists, and also Mary, who comes from a different perspective, and myself. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I am one of the artists who's going to be contributing to this second iteration of Love Letters to Post Europe, the live event this weekend, and I hope we'll see you all there. And so I've just come up with a few unfair questions for everyone here. And
So I thought that I would start off asking Maria probably the most straightforward question about the difference between approaching this issue of a love letter to a post-Europe in the 2018 context as opposed to the 2015 context, where we're dealing with very different referenda and you know, kind of quite different socio-political grounds. So yeah, and you can take that as broadly or as personally as you like.
Hello everyone. I have contributed to this response with a love song that I wrote going back to my parents' house after 13 years of absence from Greece. So I was lucky and unlucky at the same time to be away while all these crises, referendums, elections were happening. I was still going back to vote, which was very important in the past years. So when I initially went back to my home place in Thessaloniki, there was this, writing a love song is always comes from a loss of a lover, losing something of Europe that I had the chance as well to cherish as a European studying abroad and profiting really from this identity. So it was really painful actually and very depressive, and lots of my people and my friends were actually trying to understand that and try and feel this it's quite emotional actually. So reflecting back to it 3 years later, it's actually really interesting because I was reading recently this correspondence between Franco Bifo Berardi, this media theorist and activist from Italy, and it's a form of a letter as well that he's addressing to DM25 as a panel. He was actually part of the panel of DM25, and his letter is of resignation from the panel. It's really a punch in the stomach. He wants to really resign not only from the panel but also from his European identity, and he creates these really strong images the Mediterranean Sea becoming this salt becoming the Zyklon B, the fume that you used to use in the concentration camps, and really accusing Europe for being completely responsible from its colonial past and not taking responsibilities for huge violent crimes, violations of human rights that are still happening there. So it's somehow I have a lot of anger as well. Maybe if I would compose a track now, it would be more a noise, punk, really strong piece. But I really want to say as well that in this correspondence between Franco Bifo Berardi and Yanis Varoufakis, which is the former Minister of Economy, Varoufakis' response, I have to say I'm not a fan of Varoufakis, so I just put that out there. But he says something that I think is really, really sits with me at this time, which is let's be in, but let's be against it. So, yeah.
Thanks. I'm going over to Lisa now. I have a question about origins of the project, and I'm going to phrase it in terms of a popular song lyric. What's love got to do with it? Why? Why the framing in terms of love letters?
It was a very particular moment, but okay, the love thing spans across the whole thing anyway, right up till now. A love letter, okay, we're talking about a love letter, is something that exceeds boundaries, right? It's not, it doesn't pay attention to linguistic rules as such or forms of expression. So as a form of that could be used to create a response. And then more broadly, I'd say in some way, in that way as well, but it's political. I think love is political because of that too. Is that okay?
It's fine by me.
I'm thinking in the original provocation, I quote Franco Bifo-Barodi. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the quote is. I'd have a look in the book. But he, in his book Poetry and Finance, he talks about love too, and about how it exceeds, how it's excessive. It's like an excessive form. And we need that. And we need excess because we need to connect, because we're losing connections, because everything's become about divisions. And, okay, I'm making big generalizations, but to get away from another word that's being used a lot by the media, polarization, but it is true, there is a lot of polarization.
And if you want to read that first provocation, there are books available from Unbound, the Live Art Development Agency.
It's at the back. David, you know the page number,
No, it's you next. No, it's
Just I want to say that according to Empedocles, the world was composed of 4 elements, but there were 2 principles. One is the principle of love, and the other is the principle of hate. And he has organized that periods of love and periods of hate. Of course, we pass a period of hate. So to have initiative about love is tremendous. Thanks.
Seriously, not just me.
Fantastic. Actually, Demosthenes, maybe you can pick up next on the potential of crisis, because a lot of us who work in theater and performance know that crisis, loss, pain, suffering gives us kind of tremendous potential to work from. It's this great raw material, but it's also this thing that we don't actually want to see meted out on people and on populations and in our own lives. So how do you work with crisis and drama in your work?
Crisis increases, cries. So the word crisis, the ancient Greek word, is a word with 7 different meanings. Unfortunately, one of them is negative. That means crisis is something that is out of normality. There is an incident, there is an accident, and the world functioning is lost. But in the Greek spirit, crisis is a fundamental moment between thinking and action. Because when you're in front of a problem, you need to analyze, to find solutions, to assess solutions, to find alternatives. At that moment, you exercise crisis. So crisis is absolutely positive. Unfortunately, you have taken one meaning, and this meaning of crisis became dominant. So this is the problem of Greeks, because they are lost between the different meanings and the meaning that came from outside. Because, let's say, in Europe, there was always the possibility to take Greek words to make philosophy and science, and to use the Greek words as terms, as concepts. So there's a lot of confusion. And I have proposed sometimes, because speaking as a capitalist, and we know that in the capitalist society, when you use an instrument, you have to pay for that. So, around the world, you use the word crisis. So you have to pay the Greeks for that. And that was probably a solution for Greeks. It was just to give 1 cent each time you use the word crisis, and there will be no problem of crisis. So that's a big question. And as you know, there was the bubble economy 10 years ago, exactly. And the question is also, it was bubble art. And I have created a site with the name www.crisiology.org. And it's because I had the idea to invite people who have something to do with crisis to propose and to present their work. And I have to say that almost there was no Greek artist who wanted to participate in this project. So that's it was, let's say, the result of my effort, because of course a lot of artists from other countries, they have participated, and if you go sometime you can visit this society, you're going to see. And so it was something strange for Greeks. They didn't want to attack the question of crisis, but living in crisis.
But yet there was a great production of like crisis art outside of Greece.
Yes,
it's like
yes, that's this strange phenomenon that Greeks who live in Greece in crisis, as Christ in Greece, but they don't want to declare that their work is done in the name of the crisis. So that's my contribution. Is two levels. One is with this Crisiology.org, and I have done a lot of performances with the question of crisis. And I have to say that I was very lucky, because as I have tried to understand better the question of crisis, and people, they wanted to know something about crisis in Greece, but not in terms of economy or political sciences, but they asked me to speak about crisis as a poet. And as poet, as a poet. As a poet. Because I'm a poet. Yeah.
That changed my life. Mary. So you've approached something that's very live, both in terms of the live art as a form, the liveness of the ongoing changes to European identity and our kind of socio-political situation, and also a project that continues to grow and is in its second iteration now, and you're approaching that from not the perspective of, but in a way that's kind of grounded in the idea of archive. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the tension there, the kind of productive or interesting tension.
Well, that's the tension that is always there in writing, isn't it? Between what you experience and how you can remember it, and what the language is a really faulty tool for remembering, which is what makes it a kind of interesting material. I think what was most striking about coming to this, coming to the archive of the performances from 2015, was realising how much nuance is lost in times of crisis. Because, I come at it from the absolute horror of Brexit kind of bearing down on us. And I had almost forgotten about how we used to feel and talk about the EU at the time when it was trying to punish Greece. Because then this kind of thing flipped a year later, where suddenly it was that we were excluded from this place. And so much of the kind of discourse about Europe in the UK over the last couple of years has been just this, you're either massively pro the EU or you're Jacob Rees-Mogg, and there's nowhere in the middle. So it was really interesting to kind of like dive back into that and to remember the nuance, and to remember and to think also of how those,
how that correspondence with the past opens up that space again. So that's what I tried to do with writing with Lisa, was to try and, in the text that we wrote together, we both kind of absorbed some of the things that happened in the performances, sometimes taking words from the performers or kind of images or ideas, and tried to kind of embody them almost as if they were our own memories, and then remember them together. And then we looked at ways that we could kind of edit the text together to kind of try and activate that concept of the archive as something which which isn't over, because as much as the project is continuing, the archive continues too. And every time, I think it will be really interesting to look back at this in 10 years and to think what place Europe is in then. This will read like a very interesting document of these particular moments in time.
Thanks, Mary. And I have an unfair question for Claire, who can take it. Claire ended her essay with the very strong statement, "It is in our hands." And so I want to turn that over and then say, okay, it's in our hands. What's to be done?
Shall I use it? Oh, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, is that on? Thank you. I think I've had a little phrase, a couple of phrases actually going around my head for a long time. And one is Rebecca Solnit's phrase that you don't know what you do does. And she had that in one of her essays, which is about standing on the oil pipeline, and the Indian reservation in South Dakota, and saying that, even when things don't go your way, you don't know what you do does. Your standing there does something. And I'm thinking that now, as two friends of mine went out of the door, and they are the daughter-in-law and the grandson of Peter Shaw, who was the Bethnal Green MP for a long time, and who in the Labour Party had huge disappointments. And yet I think about his disappointments today and the way in which we continually renew the lives and the efforts of people in the past. So I think that's really important. I think starting a seed exchange is really important. I think that's in our hands. And I'm amazed that Jacqueline Tirrett actually understood that that's what you do, that you create a seed exchange and then you can reap from that. And then I think it's really interesting to be here. I mean, part of my life is in Greece, and it's a sort of hidden, invisible life, except in Greece. And it's very strange to suddenly think about Greece again as the centre of discussion, or the centre of Europe, because Greece is a culture which exists which has a huge amount of sense of symbolic action. Do you know what I mean? There's an enormous amount of a sense of the culture continuing itself through continuous symbolic action. So I was thinking about Mirologia and things about, songs about mourning and so on. And I actually think that symbolic action, the way in which we decide to process or to stand up, to declare ourselves, is also very important. And I've come to really understand that that's part of Yanis Varoufakis' practice. I've come to kind of have more respect for the Yanis with one N, as my mother-in-law always says, and to understand what that position might be. But I think that question of you don't know what you do does, maybe I hang on to it. It's one of the most important things that I think we have.
I think that's fantastic as well, because I think we tend to think of revolution and action as somehow being heroic and explosive and notorious, rather than actually the way that things change are often quiet, nurturing, about being present and often being present in a whole mass of people.
There's one more thing, which is very much about mortality, which is, there is no progress, and we can't stay. We have to leave. And those things are really, really important. And actually understanding that we're here for such a short time, and that we can't stay. That our dwelling is very, very, very temporary, provisional, I think is one of the other things about really understanding that what we do has to be given very, very lightly to the future. Not to be depressing.
I
You know what, that's actually not depressing at all. It's sort of hugely empowering. Spooky.
Yeah.
I'll give you a little spooky. So what do you say? Do we do any of you have questions for each other, or anything that you want to add or expound on? Okay, well then, does anyone on the floor have a question you want to, or a comment or a thought, a sort of loving quote, or something that, Spanner, you want to throw into the mix?
Yes. Hi, so maybe I have a question for you, Susan, now. Because you're responding to Lisa's new provocation in the second iteration of the project. I was wondering, what you are going to present, which are your thoughts about the performance that you will do this week as well, and what's your response to everybody. Maybe another question would be, this is a gathering of love. We were saying the idea of love, of dissent, it's been said. I wonder whether you see this kind of work as a work of resistance in this period, so the kind of doing something to resist in these times.
I think that I have a kind of tenuous relationship with Europe as somebody who wasn't born a European but became one and then might become not European again. So I think that there's I wanted to come from the perspective of someone who can't necessarily take Europe or Europeanness for granted, and really whose sense of belonging within our kind of nation-state paradigm can always be revoked or denied at any moment, in any place, by anyone. And that's the kind of condition of people of color in the West. And we see that happening now with people who were very much born in the empire, who are somehow now being denuded of UK citizenship. We also see it on trains where during kind of at the height of what some people call the migrant crisis, people of color traveling through the Schengen area are suddenly being stopped and asked to show identification, even though they have the right to travel, because we have to make sure that it's just Europeans who are traveling. And how do we find out who's European? Well, we can paper bag test it. If you don't know, the paper bag test is if you're darker than a paper bag, then that's a testament to your non-whiteness. And so I love Europe a lot, and want to qualify that with saying that I know the difference between Europe and the European Union. But I also think that love is not uncritical, and that love is also not, or rather, that love is too often an alibi for abuse. And so I want to use my love letter to bring some of that reflection to the fore.
I mean, this is in the introduction to the book, but I mean, this year is like 50 years on, 1968. I don't know what we think about that, but also in the UK, for example, just slightly connecting what you said there, the Liberty published, it's really available online, a guide to the hostile environment. Unbelievable, right? That we need that at this point in time in this country, well, in Europe, etc.
Do we have any other thoughts or questions or reflections? Because of course we can carry the conversation on, maybe in a little bit more of a relaxed way over some drinks and some nibbles, which we've got over here, as well as copies of the really, really beautiful publication that kicks off the weekend of performances as well, that we hope we will see all of you at Artadmin. Maybe I'll begin the signing off process by saying thanks so much for coming. It's been really brilliant, and it's always great to be here at LADA.
I'll continue the signing off process. Just to thank everybody for coming. As Susan says, please do have a drink, please do buy a book. Huge thanks to everybody who's spoken and contributed tonight, and mega thanks to Lisa Alexander for making all of this possible. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everybody.